Hello, everyone, and welcome. I apologize, we're not in my office. As you can see, we're once again in my living room, but I am so excited because this is one of the last times that I have to teach a course completely online, and that is very exciting for me. Not really a celebration for you so much, I guess, but I'm pretty excited to be back on campus next semester. And we have this week that we just wrapped up, next week, and then that's the end of the semester, and we go into finals week. And so I wanted to give you a wrap up of how we're going to finish this semester, because that may be a question to you. There are some changes, obviously, to the syllabus. All of that will actually end up in your favor. I would never punish anybody for perhaps problems or situations that come up during the semester that are, of my own making or of external factors. And this semester, we certainly had a few of those, and that's okay. But we're going to wrap up in the following way. The first thing that you might notice is that you don't have an exam 2 yet, because that's going to be during finals week as scheduled, and that's another 250 points. So right now you're not looking at the majority of your points on Blackboard. Right now on Blackboard, there's probably maybe about 50% of your points on there, if that. So anyway, that exam is going to be worth 250 points. It will be the same format as your last exam, though, so there won't be any major changes or more work or anything like that that you need to do. I figured you would rather have, a little extra points, a few extra points on your test, then have to rate a couple more short discussion boards. So I think this is the better way to go to save you time and all of us energy. So that's what we're going to do there. The second thing is that the explication is no longer a part of the class. We're not going to do it. I'm just going to let that drop off. I think I told you that before. And then the third thing that I need to address is the short essay. You all will be writing a very short essay, nothing too crazy. And that essay question, and I'll put this obviously in the assignment directions as well, but that essay is going to be answering a question about the impact of media on democracy. And that is a question that we actually asked and answered in the beginning of the semester, and I kind of want to know if anything's changed. And there's a couple of reasons why it might have, by the way. First of all, because you may have learned something new. Second of all, because you may have experienced something new in this election season. Or third, because you're starting to realize, as I am, that it's difficult to teach a political communication class when your political system is sort of being called into question. And for those of you who have been paying attention, which I assume is almost all of you, if not all of you, the truth of the matter is that we've had some pretty interesting public discourse going on that has less to do with candidates and advertisements and campaign communication than it does with counting votes, the processes of that, whether or not we need an electoral college, how democracy is or is not working, and what our voting rules and regulations should be on the day in which we vote. So we've had a lot of questions and conversations politically that are far outside the reach of your communication scholar. Most of us don't have anything to do with that in terms of looking at those things specifically. But the one thing we do weigh in on regularly is whether or not we have a healthy democracy. And one of the ways that we felt that the health of our democracy has been impacted is via changes in technology that get us to where we are politically. So your question is going to center around the following, actually. We're going to change it just a little bit, and I'm going to say, has technology or changes in technology, have the changes in technology and the way we communicate changed, increased, decreased, modified, or kept the same the division that we see in American politics? And we've always talked about that division. That division sort of has to be there. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. It has to be there. But how far it goes and how badly or how little it affects our democracy is up for debate. So the question you might have about that is why do I say that we have to have division? Why can't we have unification in the country? And my answer to that is this: it depends on how you define those things. But I know I'm smiling because I know what a ridiculous answer that is. But it's also about the way that the country handles division and unification. Do we need to be unified? Yes, on some things, I think it's important to be unified. And I think there are a lot of things we actually are unified on. At least I used to feel that way. And I think this is the biggest change that I've seen in my study of political communication over the course of the past couple of years. And that is that it used to be that no matter who you were talking about, no matter what parties, no matter what persons, no matter what part of the country, no matter who they were, we all were unified behind the idea of having a healthy democracy as our form of government. And that was never questioned. It was literally never questioned. If there were people who suggested otherwise or hinted at otherwise, chances were they didn't get elected. They barely were seen, very rarely. I can think of a few examples when we've watched these people speak and they scared us. I'm thinking of one in particularly, and I can't think of his last name, and that's driving me crazy because you would think I would remember this. But back in I want to say it was the late 80s to early 90s, there was a speaker at the Republican National Convention who, his name was Pat. I know that. I'm thinking Pat, and I don't think it's Pat Robertson. It's Pat something. I'll have to look that up for you. Who talked about needing to mount up on our horses and ride again to American freedom. And it was a lot of imagery and metaphor that you couldn't like directly say, okay, that guy's lost his mind. He's up there talking about basically Hitler-esque, because of course we always go to that authoritarian regime, apocalyptic sort of rhetoric about democracy. And it was very scary to us. That person, he never made it past being at the conventions. I mean, he was never up for being president, vice president, or anything like that. I think he was, in fact, a senator at one point, but that was as far as he got because there were so many checks in the system to make sure that people with those kinds of thoughts, people who thought we needed to overthrow our president and have a different kind of leadership, people who thought that we should live in a theocracy where, if you don't know what that is, where a religion dictates the politics of a place. And there are those types of governments out there. They are not democracies. I have a friend who I think I've mentioned before, works for Sky News in Australia. He's a political commentator. He was born and raised in New York City. And I met him when I was in high school, and I've never seen him again. But we always wrote to each other, like literal physical letters way back when. And now, we're on Facebook together, and he challenges me a lot because he and I greatly disagree on a lot of things. And one of those is, should everyone vote? And he is of the firm belief that not everybody should vote, that there should only be certain people who vote. They have to be educated in a certain way in order to vote. And I'm sort of against that. I'm sort of if you truly believe that the people rule the government or that the government, the people in the government are representatives of us in the government, then I don't think that you can have a test to decide who is and is not smart enough to vote, right? We're all voting for our own leadership. And that's important in my mind. But to him, he says, well, that's what's led to a great deal of trouble in the way that we elect presidents and Congress people and so on. So it's a good question. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. Sorry, excuse me. Wow, I'm not winning today, let me tell you. And so I apologize for the sneezing there. So what makes a healthy democracy a good democracy? Is it the number of people who vote? Is it the limit in disagreement? Is it unification only, or is it division? So I made the argument before that division is important in our democracy. So why? How do I come to that conclusion? What makes me say that? Well, for those of you who are students of argument at any point in your life, you know that there's a point where we decide between two equally oppositional forces or ideas or concepts. That point is known as stasis. It's a point of stability that occurs when you have two equally oppositional ideas. For example, guilt versus innocence, or right versus wrong sometimes, or peanut butter versus jelly. No, I'm just kidding on that one. Those two go together very, very well. There's no stasis there. The United States versus the USSR during the Cold War. Okay. Those created points of stability. That sounds crazy. I understand that. I understand a Cold War does not sound like a point of unification and stability, but it is. And let me explain to you how. And as someone who lived through this, it's pretty astonishing that these words would come out of my mouth. I certainly don't want to go back there, but I feel like we kind of are. So why not be educated about it? So back then, what would happen is we knew that the United States and the USSR were the superpowers in the entire world, and they kept everyone else in check because we would not allow everybody else to develop nuclear weapons. We would develop them faster. We would have more of them. And by we, I mean the USSR and the United States. We were in an arms war. We wouldn't let other people have the technology to make nuclear weapons. We kept that from them, kept it for ourselves. And by the way, when I say we kept other people in check, I'm not just talking about like other smaller countries like Russians invading Afghanistan and taking them over, which by the way, they lost, but that's because we armed Afghanistan. I'm sure you understand that history. I'm talking about big countries, big powers like China and Japan. Okay. And because we always knew who was in charge, who the two superpowers were, we never had to worry about sort of threats coming from other places. The biggest threat was the USSR. That was what we had to fear. And so you had the USA and the USSR, and in between those two, when they're fighting, there's that stability right there in the middle, because neither one of them is going to win. Because in the event that one wins, everybody loses, as in we're dead, and that would be bad. There was a time in our lives where we were all talking about whether or not we were going to kill more people or fewer people with a nuclear war than the USSR, which is a ridiculous argument, by the way. And there were also there was a time when Caspar Weinberger, who was the Secretary of Defense at the time, I believe, who under Reagan, I believe I have that right, my history correct, said something to the effect of, we need to have a small scale nuclear war somewhere in the middle of Europe to teach the Russians that we would beat them in the event of a nuclear war. That is crazy talk, right? That's like apocalyptic apocalyptic end of the world talk. And yet we did it. And that's not to say that everything that's nuclear is bad, by the way. I happen to really appreciate the availability, the cost, the effectiveness of nuclear energy, for example. And I happen to believe that there is a such thing as nuclear energy being more clean than coal. But of course, I come from a place where coal and nuclear energy coexist. And sometimes that's a little bit scary. Without getting into the economics of it, even though, just the power play, and we're just talking about the political rhetoric that comes down from that stability. Some people like to think that we were safer then than we are now. And I'm sorry, they may have an argument. I'm not going to say that I agree with it, but they may have a good argument there. Okay. So let's jump back further, though, in history than the 1960s to 80s. Okay. Let's go, or 50s to 80s, I guess. Let's go back further. Let's go to Washington, as in George, as in the first president of the United States. George Washington was known, if you read the letters from Jefferson, from Hamilton, from John Jay, from Monroe, and from others, you will read about the fact that Washington insisted that there be arguments and that there be debates in his cabinet. Now, his cabinet was made up of like 4 people. Nowadays, it's like, I don't know how many people are in the cabinet anymore. I've lost track. We have so many czars and people in charge of stuff. I have no idea how many people are in the cabinet. But it was sort of like we had a Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, the President, and then I don't know if we had like a Secretary of War back then. Probably not. Secretary of Defense or something. I believe that was a Secretary of State. But we had very few people in that group. But Washington insisted that they argue. In fact, he wanted Hamilton and Jefferson to argue, those famous sort of represented by Lin-Manuel Miranda most recently, debates. If you go and you read the books, the letters between John Adams and Abigail Adams, his wife, if you read some of the things that Jefferson wrote, Hamilton's letters, essays, Washington wanted them to argue because he believed that by having these arguments with the best ideas of all sides coming together, that then someone could make the best decision. And in his case, he was talking about himself, but he never believed that he himself was the only one to make a decision. You have to have the input of everyone, all these different ideas to come together to pick the best idea. And whenever people say, I don't identify as a Democrat or Republican, I vote for the best candidate, that's what they're saying. I mean, that's literally what we're talking about is I don't need to attach this to one side or the other. This isn't about winning. It's about making the best decision for us. That's what politics used to be about. I don't know where we went wrong or if we went wrong even. Maybe some people think that, the way that we do things now is perfectly great. But the argument that we should all be unified behind one idea is good if you're talking about that idea being democracy. It's not so good if you're talking about how healthcare should be run or how laws should be written, or how voting should be done, or how elections should be run. You need multiple ideas to make the best decisions at the time. Now, perhaps you don't believe me still, so let's think about it this way. Whenever you talk to people about, okay, I've got this dilemma. Do I want to change jobs? Do I want to stay where I'm at? What do I want to do? Do I want to leave? Do I want to stay? Sort of a, if I stay, there will be trouble. If I go, there will be double sort of problem. That was, I don't remember the artist who sang that song, but it's a great song. So in this, should I stay, should I go tension that I have, living there is nice because I don't have to make a decision and I can live with the potential of both sides being good and right, but you can't live there forever. At some point you have to make a decision. So what do people tell you to do? They tell you to sit down and make a list of pros and cons. All the arguments for why you should go, all the arguments for why you should stay. And when you go through that list, I tell people all the time, just because you have more on the pro side than the con side doesn't mean you should do it. It means that it's a way of organizing your thoughts, but more importantly, it's a way of generating all the thoughts that you need, all the considerations you need to make the best decision. And in politics, I feel like that's probably true as well. And I think a lot of people would argue with me about that. But it's how George Washington thought about things. Hamilton was less interested in that. Hamilton was sort of like my friend who said, come on. We all know that I'm the brightest person in the room and I should make these decisions. Props to Hamilton. But he wasn't always right. So anytime someone came along and said, I know exactly what we need to do, I know better than you do, I should take over, there was always a check in the system. You'll notice that Hamilton was never president, but that John Adams was, as an example. Perhaps unpopular president, but he was still a president. Times have changed so much now that the amount of input that the polity can have and the amount of just sheer content that the polity receives from our government makes it nearly impossible to say, hey, let's have this debate with everybody and come to the right conclusion. I don't know how we're going to rectify that situation. Here's what I do know. Every single model, every single theory that I was taught about how to study political communication is almost gone. Almost all of them are gone. Because things have changed so much that the way that we communicate with our government has changed so much. Therefore, the way we study it has to change. And I know I told you that in the beginning of the semester as well. And obviously in 4 months, they did not solve that problem. And it's going to be a while before we know how to solve it. But if it is true that we all want a democracy, then we have one unifying thing that we can work from. And if we believe that we want a democracy, then we also have unifying principles that we can move from. We could use those as common points or commonalities and move from there. So I want you to keep that in mind as you're answering the question, is it going to be completely a research paper? Is it going to be an opinion paper? No, this is an essay. So it's an essay that hopefully you're able to answer the question, and maybe you make some references to historical points, experiences, maybe an article if you want to. The idea is that you make an argument to me. You got to help me out. I'm interested to see not just what your answers are, but how you came to those conclusions. And so I'll be posting that tonight. It is not due until December 9th. That gives you a full week. Some of you were asking, how long does it have to be? I would say a page and a half-ish. Okay? Don't go shorter than a page. You don't need to go over 2 pages, a page and a half-ish. Yes, that's double-spaced. If you want to put more in there, put more in there. I'm okay with that. You just don't have to. Personally, for me, answering this question, it would probably take me about 3 to 5 pages if I was going to answer it, but that's because apparently I have no ability to filter my thoughts sometimes, or to pull back on the amount of argumentation I feel I need to make. So don't use me as a guide. But yeah, please don't give me like an 8-page paper or something. I'm not looking for that. But I'm looking for a reasonable argument that you can support the claim that you're making in answering this question. That's all I'm looking for. Hopefully that helps. Hopefully that's enough for you. So again, that essay will be due on the 9th, which is 1 week from today. You have a full week, as always, as promised. And I'll be working on getting your other grades in so that you know where you stand. And if you have any questions, you could just let me know. And again, do know that if something did not get done on the syllabus, like that explication assignment, that will not hurt you. at all in any way, shape, or form. It will benefit you. It will not hurt you. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, complaints, or threats, until then, well, I shouldn't say threats, but you know what I mean. Just give me a yell. The phone is definitely the best way to reach me. It's the quickest way to reach me. But of course, there's email and there's the Blackboard site as well. Okay, everybody, you take care, and I will see you next week.